All right. Well, you guys think we should go ahead and get started, and maybe some of the stragglers can jump in later. Um, all right. Well, again, I wanted to welcome everybody for joining us for this. You can tell by the title that Rita and Dan and I are, passionate about kind of, leaving a good mark on the environment while, before we leave, I guess, for lack of a better way of saying it. But yeah, revitalization of the earth. It's something that we're all interested in, and glad to see that we have so many like-minded people out there joining us. Wanted to also mention that Rita and Dan and I both went, all three of us went to Washington State University, so this is kind of a nice reunion of sorts also. So I'll go ahead and introduce our first speaker now, Dr. Rita Abi-Ghanem. So she earned her PhD in soil science from Washington State University with an emphasis in soil microbiology and sustainable agriculture. She has extensive experience in humic acids and soil health. She previously led a team developing and testing carbon-based soil and plant liquid nutrition. Dr. Abi-Ghanem is a founder and soil scientist at Ag Consultant Services, focusing on improving soil health. And she also teaches part-time at Allen Hancock College. So with that, Dr. Abi-Ghanem.
Thank you so much, Ashley, for the introduction. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. And welcome to our webinar. My presentation, sorry, it's not working right now. Technical problem. I gotta go and share again. It just was working a minute ago. My presentation today on revitalizing Earth is gonna focus more on the role of a humic acid in improving soil health. First of all, I'm gonna discuss or define soil health, and many of you are familiar with it. Then soil health strategy. What are humic acids? Some of you are familiar and some are not. And the benefit of humic acid as well as their mode of action. First of all, what is soil health? You all know that soil health is now a very big topic and people discuss it a lot. And by definition is the capacity of a soil to sustain the plant and animal productivity, maintain or enhance water and air quality, and support the human health and habitation over human time scale. But on another word, it has three pillars: the physical, the biological, and the chemical. Each of these pillars has some indicators to evaluate them, to evaluate the soil health. Under physical indicator, we focus on the soil structure. We look at aggregation, the infiltration rate of water, bulk density, the water holding capacity, the productivity of crop, porosity, and compaction. For chemical indicator, we focus on the pH, the nutrient holding capacity, the soluble salt, sodium and nutrient availability. And for biological indicator, we look at the presence of macro and microfauna, the biological activity, the carbon to nitrogen ratio, organic matter, and roots. So what are the strategies of soil health? There are numerous strategies that improve soil health. No-till or reduced tillage is one of them that reduce erosion, enhance water retention, and preserve soil structure. Mulching, whether it's organic or inorganic, help preserve the moisture and regulate soil temperature. Balanced fertilizer is very critical to test your soil and add nutrients as needed by the plant, not to over-fertilize or over-adding chemical. Companion plants are a strategy where you add or you plant crops that repel pests. Biofertilizer is another one, adding, for example, microbes such as rhizobia or mycorrhizae or bacillus. Biostimulant is a huge part of soil health strategies. And by biostimulant, we discuss humic substances such as fulvic and humic acids And these compounds contribute to soil health by enhancing nutrient uptake, soil structure, and supporting microbial activity. And I will be discussing more in depth that part. Water management practice is critical in soil health, as well as integrated pest management and adding windbreak to reduce wind and water erosion. So what are humic acids? Humic substances are complex molecules that exist in nature, and it exists by decomposition of organic matter over thousands or 100,000s of years. I call it old compost. And there are deposits of coals. People call it coals that could be inanodite or oxidized lignite or humalite or peat, etc. And company extract from those deposits humic substances to make humic acids that are soluble in alkali or fulvic acids that are soluble in acid or alkali. The structure of humic acids is very complex. It has those carbon rings and has several functional groups all over. Those functional groups can be a carboxyl acid, meaning COH, or hydroxyl, OH, or carbonyl group. Note that the carboxyl or hydroxyl can lose a hydrogen, be negatively charged. That can contribute to increasing the CEC of your soil and absorb or chelate those cations. You have amino groups that can lose NH2, that can lose a hydrogen, be positively charged, and chelate the anions. And you have ether that bond hydrogen and also play a role on overall structure and stability of these compounds. So now the question that always got addressed to me, saying, which one is better? Is it better to use lignite or lignite? Or how can we know which of these humic substances work? Well, there's a variation of humic substances between different sources, between lignite or lignite or humalite. And within even lignite or each of those, there are variations that depends on what functional group is there, the degree of oxidation, how much is this lignite has been oxidized, give you how much oxygen is there. What if you have a dominance of carboxyl or phenolic, you will have more of those negative charges and higher CEC. So it all depends what is the source of those coals that lead to that variation between the functional group and the functionality of those humic substances. So there are, if I discuss carboxyl and phenolic group, mentioning they can lose, for example, a hydrogen and be negatively charged and absorb a cation. And those are the phenolic and carboxyl groups, and that help in nutrient retention and water retention as well. But there are also the quinoids groups. The quinoids group stimulate or enhance root development. They lead to the resistance of the plant to stress and facilitate synthesis of chlorophyll. And at the end, I will show you a study that done that support those claims. The peptides groups help also to promote resistance of the plant to stress. And it's a food for microbes because microbes need those amines, those nitrogen. Sugar is a good source of food for microbes. That's why humic acid promote microbial community in the soil. So what is the classification of humic acid? Where does it sit? Is it a fertilizer? Is it a soil conditioner? What's the umbrella? It's classified under biostimulants. And biostimulants, by definition, it's a substance or a microorganism when applied to plants or soil. It enhances nutrient efficiency, increase tolerance against abiotic stresses, increase crop yield and quality, and contribute to sustainable high output, low input crop production. And these benefits are regardless of its nutrient content. So how humic acid benefit the plants then? The Humic Product Trade Association had 3 claims in their website. And the claims, they summarizing into approved root plants and growth, enhanced nutrient availability and uptake, and higher crop yield and quality. But there are many research that has been done that support those label claims and more. I picked a review paper by Canellas et al., and I selected this table 1. But this is part of the table, it's over 2 pages. And they gathered some of the research on different crops, vegetable, fruit crops, and ornamental, that state the benefit of using humic acids. For example, on broccoli, commercial liquid humic acid combined with NPK fertilizer increased 15% the yield. On a grape, foliar spray of humic acid at different plant stages increased the berry sizes and also led to shortened cropping cycle, and so on. I highly encourage that you read this paper and you gain more familiarity about those different research, but there are also more that has been done to support those label claims. So humic acid is part of soil health. How does this work? We discussed earlier that soil health has 3 pillars: chemical, biological, and physical. Where does humic acid sit or contribute to each of this pillar or this role? First of all, humic acid has a biological benefit by stimulating biological beneficial microbes. It's a food for microbes, but it also stimulates the plant metabolism to secrete organic acid in the rhizosphere that can also contribute to stimulating beneficial microbes. It enhances, when you add humic acid, enhance the rate of seed germination and also improve their viability. It promotes more vigorous roots and also help in better resistance to stress, like water stress, for example, because it absorbs water on its surface. So overall, it improves the microbial activity, root growth, and strong plants. Now, the second benefit is chemical. And how does chemical benefit work? The phenol and carboxylic functional group, when they lose this hydrogen, they be negatively charged, and that is an increase in the cation exchange capacity, which lead to nutrient holding capacity as well. And because they're rich in carbon and mineral, they can promote more plant growth. Plant needs carbon and mineral. They retain water, and those fertilizer that you add, soluble fertilizer, that can be released into the rhizosphere as needed. So it helps in retention of those nutrients and slowly release it to the plant. It holds more water, that's important during stress condition, increase plant nutrient uptake, promote penetration and retention of calcium in soils. I have studied to support that, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it. You're always welcome to email me, and I'll be happy to share those information with you. And it reduces lockup of phosphorus. How does it reduce lockup of phosphorus? It's an increase in extreme condition. If you have a high pH, the calcium and phosphorus, as you all know, precipitate. But when you add humic acid, the calcium will be chelated on the surface of humic acid, which free up phosphorus to be taken up by the plant. In acidic soil, phosphorus will be chelated in aluminum and iron. But when you have a humic acid, the aluminum and iron will be absorbed on their surface, which free up phosphorus to be taken up by plant. Again, I have studied that support this, and you're welcome to contact me later on. But given the fact that I only have 15 minutes, I'm not going to be able to discuss this in depth. But overall, the chemical benefits are improved nutrient uptake, water availability, and reducing nutrient loss. Now, physical benefit. I would like you to think about physical benefit of a humic acid like organic matter. What does organic matter do to the soil is almost similar. It improves the structure of the soil. And when your structure is improved, you have more friable and granular for better penetration of roots, higher porosity, more air, and also humic acid improve the moisture holding capacity of the soil. So what it does, if you have a compacted soil that has those cation, the humic acid will chelate those cation and open up those compacted clay. So in a clay soil, adding humic acid will lead to friability. And in sandy soil, when you add humic acid, you will decrease the leaching of your nutrient because it will be absorbed on the surface of the phenolic and carboxylate group. So how does this work? I like to rely on this table that I took it from a review paper by Canellas et al., and who summarized many studies by different scientists and came up with this beautiful diagram that show humic acid in the rhizosphere added in soil or via leaf foliar application will stimulate H plus ATPase that in its turn lead to root growth promotion and activate secondary ion transport that help in nutrient uptake. It activates calcium channel and calcium influx and cell signaling that lead to nitric oxide regulation that promote root hair. And also activate some anion channel that lead to the extraction of organic acid exudation. When you have organic acid exudation in the rhizosphere, it's going to promote also more microbes. So it helps as a food for microbe itself because it has carbon, but also by promoting organic acid in the rhizosphere, by promoting the plants to exudate those organic acid. Humic acids also induce the primary metabolism that lead to a better photosynthesis and better energy in the plant, and nitrogen and sulfur assimilation, as well as stimulation of secondary metabolism that lead to phenol production, for example, and improve the plant defense against stresses such as drought. With that being said, I would like to conclude by the overall benefits of humic acid is to stimulate root growth, improve microbial activity, increases nutrient uptake, frees up soil-bound nutrients, and reduces plant stress. Thank you all for attending. If you have any question, please feel free to reach out to me at rita.ag@consultantservices.com. With that being said, I would like to pass the time to our next presenter, Dr. Hammac, who has a lifelong passion for nature and outdoors and has worked over 20 years in academia, government, nonprofit, corporate position on soil science-related matter. He received his PhD from Washington State University as well, and he studied soil in the context of agriculture to maximize farm profit and ecosystem services while minimizing soil loss and degradation. Today, Dr. Hammac will discuss soil health, just a fact. And Ashley, I would like to pass the floor to yours to continue our webinar today. And thank you.
Thanks, Rita. And thanks again, everybody, for joining us. We mentioned it just in discussion that maybe we should have one of these at Rico's, and based on the number of WSU Cougars I'm seeing out there, I think that's probably a good idea. So let's talk about that. We're going to continue off. Rita teed me up perfectly for what I'm going to talk about. Hopefully, I'm going to tee up Dan for what he's going to talk about. So I'm going to talk about soil health testing. There's a lot to talk about. So I'm just going to, try to not drown you with a fire hose, I guess, but go through a lot of information. If there's any questions or anything, definitely get in touch with me. So I like Rita's Venn diagram much better than mine, but I had to do that just to show the three pillars there. So my definition, I would say, definitions, these things it's kind of hard to put your finger on it. It's like you know it if you see it, but it's hard to put your finger on it. So in my mind, I say the ability of a soil to function within its normal range of its inherent carrying capacity. And I like the term carrying capacity. It's not really used in crop production. It's used in livestock production more, and definitely in wildlife management. But I think we need to start looking at cropping systems in terms of carrying capacity as well. And maybe you could argue that yield potential is somewhat getting at that. But anyway, be able to absorb environmental perturbations or be resilient. And so maybe, so I just Googled fertile valley or fertile, fertile field. And this is what I got. This isn't quite what I was going for. And I think if you all imagine fertile, a fertile place, you can probably see a picture in your mind. And of course, it's the thing on the Hidden Valley Ranch bottle. But that is a magical place. I don't know that we can ever get there, but so that's kind of like the quintessential fertile image. So you could say, well, this is infertile, but would you say that this is unhealthy? The other one was healthy. This one unhealthy? And so when we go to monitor soil health, there's a lot to monitor. There's what do you want to look at? What do you want to measure in soil? People have figured out how to measure a lot of things over the years, and so we can't measure everything to determine soil health. That's not a cost-effective way to go about doing it. But we can measure some things, but we need to be smart about what we're going to measure. I was in on a study. We measured a lot of things. We were trying to look at crop, tillage, and landscape effects on soil health. Back then, we called it soil quality. We used the SMAF soil health scoring system, which was an early precursor to the CASH, the Cornell Comprehensive Assessment of Soil Health. And now what's come since then is the USDA Soil Health Assessment Protocol and Evaluation Soil Health Scoring System. So it's a very a lot of information goes into it. It's actually not that complicated, but just a lot of information has to go into it. A lot of measurements has to go into it. So not real friendly for a pedestrian user, definitely not for a farmer, just kind of trying to make decisions on cropping. And so these top, and I wanted to get my pointer here, but you can see where, like, above this pointer here is what all we measured, and then below that are some of the scores that turned out. It's a 0 to 1 type of score. But what I'm getting at is there's a lot of things we can measure. And if we think about what is soil, what is it that lends to a healthier soil? If we have, like, if we're talking about one soil, and what kind of defines a soil is it's a function of climate, topography, organisms interacting with parent material over time. We have to kind of operate within the constraints of what we're given within a given soil. So within that, a soil is composed of, and maybe you've seen this diagram here, we can't really do much about the mineral fraction other than change the volume of empty space, or non-mineral or non-solid gaseous, and then because a plant's ability to access water is lends to higher yields equates to more health. So if we can do things that improve the water holding capacity or improve gas exchange, we improve soil health. If we do things like in areas where the topsoil has been degraded or eroded and the organic matter has been depleted, if we rebuild organic matter or we do things to preserve organic matter, that builds soil health. Again, can't do much about the mineral situation. That actually does have a lot to say about what health, I guess how we interpret it without bias. So we have inherent differences in soil, the soil forming factors that I just mentioned, and we have management differences in soil. And there's 5. You could probably think of some more. Whatever system you're in, it's going to be custom to that. And so you know, theoretically, management affects the things that we measure that tell us what, soil health. Inherent differences in soil definitely affect our outcomes in the soil health indicators that we're trying to measure. And so when we're talking about soil forming factors, you can kind of boil that down to location. So I'm going to go down a rabbit hole here for a second, but just hear me out. All right, with location, as you go, we have this thing in soil science, landscape spatial analysis, called spatial autocorrelation, and this is a thing in soils. So soils are positively autocorrelated. So the box on the left, as you get farther and farther away from a point, those 2 points are less and less related until at some point they become completely unrelated. And so you have these different types of scenarios, but soils can be thought of as positively spatially autocorrelated. And so that is assessed using semi-variogram. And semivariance is similar to R squared in that, I can't remember if this scale is actually right or not, but it's between 1 and 0, or as the variance, as the distance between 2 points increases, the amount of correlation between those two between those 2 points decreases until it becomes no correlation, and that those 2 points would be equally correlated to any other point in space. So that's what this graph here is representing. Okay, and so that comes out in, if we look back at the soil composition then has an inherent effect on soil water holding capacity. So if we're talking about soil health and we're measuring soil water holding capacity to tell something about soil health, then we need to take into account texture. Okay, so this is just one example of many. So a lot of you might know that a sandy soil is often a droughty soil, and a clayey soil is often a not very well drained soil. So these are kind of the things I'm getting at, and I need to pick up the pace here, so I'm going to kind of fly through this. But the point here is that capillary action is a big part of soil health. Better access to water, more root volume, more void space volume for water to get in and be stored by. So just reiterating there. Go back to this picture here. So I think it's safe to say that if we're talking about soil health, maybe one is not healthier than the other, or maybe it's not fair to grade these on the same scale. Maybe that's a fair thing to say. All right, and maybe these two aren't. It's not fair to grade these two on the same scale, and I would argue that it's not even fair to grade these two crops, even in the same location on the same scale, if you're in a maybe not in the same field, but in a similar locale. If you have one that's dominated by soybeans and one that's dominated by corn, those are going to have two different profiles, soil profile. And so I want to dive into a little bit more about the soil biology now, and kind of pick up where I just left off with kind of, okay, here's an example of why crop type might make a difference in your evaluation of soil health. So this diagram here is from this paper down here at the bottom, and it's total dissolved organic carbon leached from the fields, the leaching losses of dissolved organic carbon from agricultural soils in the upper Midwest. All right, and there's different crop types down here. And the only thing I want to show you is that it's changing. It's all over the place. So that's dissolved organic carbon. That's the carbon that's coming out of the root system from these cropping systems. And this is the fuel that feeds the microbes that are there. Okay. So quoting in the study, the content of dissolved organic carbon in soils under agricultural soils was changing throughout the year. So not only did it change by crop type, it changed seasonally throughout the year. And so we know that seasons are different. You know, we can look outside and see that the seasons are different. But what effect does that have on microbial biomass? Okay, so Alan Franzlovers, and this isn't quite showing up right on here, but basically wanted to show you that soil microbial biomass and mineralizable carbon also changes throughout the growing season. So here's an example of microbial biomass and mineralizable carbon at 3 different sampling periods, one at planting, one at flowering, and one post-harvest. And you can see that it fluctuates. Not saying anything else other than it fluctuates. So if you're taking measurements, if you're trying to pinpoint and eliminate bias, this is going to be a source of bias. Even no matter how good you are at trying to eliminate it, this is going to be the kind of bias that is going to make introduce noise into any type of assessment that you're trying to do. So this is a very good illustration by the NRCS of the same type of effect here. So I'm going to fly through this more here. You know, some of the benefits here of soil microorganisms, biodiversity. What we do on the land, it has an effect of what the response is by the microbes in the soil. The plants are the host. The microbes are the inhabitant, or sometimes the symbiont to that host. So when you change the host, of course, that's going to change the composition of the organisms that are then, you know, an inhabitant to those hosts. So it's really like a field of dreams. If you build it, they will come. In a lot of cases, I'm not saying that you know, there's not ways to speed things up, but okay, so I'm running out of time here, and I'm going to just invite everyone that's listening to reach out to me. I'm totally skimming over the chemical and the physical here. Chemical, it's hard to beat a routine soil test. It's a lot of bang for your buck, a lot of actionable information for not a lot of money compared to some of the biological tests. For biological tests, you want to make sure I'm going to speed through here. I had way too many slides because I wanted to, you know, show you guys as much as I could. But some of my take homes were that, you know, you need to really hone in on what question you try to answer and how is that test going to answer that question. What you're measuring, how is that going to be affected by other things that you don't have control over, like what I was just talking about with the microbes. And then finally, when it comes to physical, chemical, and biological, you do well in being efficient, cost effective, to avoid overlapping measurements. There are some measurements that kind of are similar to one another. CO2 respiration is similar to, you know, other ones. CO2 respiration is also very spiky and variable throughout the growing season. It's a very popular test, also known as the Haney soil health test. It's very spiky, very hard to track soil health with that. especially if you're doing it for a short time, and you don't take the seasonal variability into effect. So with that, I'll stop and I'll turn it over to Dan.
All right, sorry, just bringing up my slides here. Thank you, Ashley. All right, so just quick briefly about me. I also went to WSU, did a lot of my early career work working on like conservation systems in Southern Africa before eventually moving back to the US and then getting involved in the ag technology space. I was one of the co-founders of RSI, which we started in about 2017. So anyway, and I would also like to thank everyone for coming. Really great to see such a good turnout today. So what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to take a bit of a turn, a little less scientific from what we've been talking about, what Dr. Hammac and Dr. Abi-Ghanem were talking about. And I want to talk about getting more from soil health data in particular. And I guess I view this question of soil health data as maybe the last step or one of the last steps in a soil health journey, right? Because that first step for a producer is to decide to care about soil health, right? That's step one. Then, right, it's investigating which methods of addressing soil health might fit their production system, their agroecology, their context, etc. And so, you know, and Dr. Abi-Ghanem gave a really good conversation about humic acids. But could be, you know, cover cropping, no-till, etc., depending on who you are. You know, the next step obviously is implementing that practice. And then after that is what Ashley's talking about, which is like, how do we now go through the process of after you've done monitoring and maybe you've changed your methods, how do we then get additional benefits from all of these things, all of this soil health journey that you've been on, from deciding to care to monitoring and changing your practices in accordance? And so I'm going to share a few examples of things that most people here are probably very familiar with. There have been, over the last, 3 to 5 years, really a proliferation of programs that seek to support producers who are improving their soil health. One of the key ones is, carbon farming programs, ecosystem service marketplaces that either pay based on practices or on increases in soil carbon over time. Another area that we're starting to see are different certifications. And certifications is a really broad bucket, right? It can go anywhere from like a regenerative ag certificate to very specific export certifications. And the second one, this export certifications, is something that I expect we're going to see more and more over the next 5 to 10 years, where we're going to get to a point where if you want to export a pound of beef or a gallon of ethanol or a bushel of corn into certain markets, that is going to have to come with a carbon intensity score, a carbon footprint of that product. Also, outside of export certifications, you have more localized market connections, right? Some of the more kind of matchmaking type services that are field to market, right? That try to put a score on a producer's practices. How regenerative are they? How well are they doing building up soil health? And then connect them to supply chain actors. It could be restaurants or food companies or whatever, to try to source that regenerative or other soil health building products. And lastly is peer-to-peer benchmarking, which I think is a really interesting use case, especially around soil health data. Dr. Hammac was just talking about this. There are a lot of indicators. There are certain things like the soil, kind of basic soil fertility tests that are very easy to interpret and act on. And then there's a lot of tests. He mentioned carbon, CO2 mineralization, respiration, where it's harder to understand what you're supposed to do with the test and how to interpret it and how to work together. And so peer-to-peer benchmarking services that allow a bunch of people to kind of pool their data, look at it, and learn from each other is a really critical part of helping people move their soil health forward. So some of the key challenges in getting to that list of that list of benefits I just mentioned, and this is not an all-inclusive list by any means, but the first one is data entry is time-consuming and repetitive, right? So any one of those programs is going to have their own list of here are all the requirements about management practices and lab data going back X number of years on each individual field, just to try to interact with that program. But then if you join that carbon program, then you go over here to join this market program, they have their own 20-page application, which is completely different. And the fact that you already filled out that carbon market application doesn't save you any time. You're always going back to step 0 with your data and filling in that 20 pages from the first page. So that's the one key challenge. Another key challenge is every producer has their own system for collecting both practice and management data and lab data. Some of it are people recording, writing things down in notebooks or, Excel spreadsheets or, things like that, to more simple farm management platforms. And by simple, I mean generally things where you have to like manually enter whatever activities are there. So there's always this data entry cost. And then on the kind of the other extreme from notebooks is these really complex, fully integrated farm management platform where your tractor is talking to your management platform or your harvester is, and it's sending all the data there automatically, right? So you have this huge swath of how farmers may be managing their soil health data. And then we have the next problem, which is all of these systems over here, right? All of these different practices, all of these different, these management platforms do not talk to all of these market programs. They're over here. And the translation between the people who want to pay you to use the data, who want to give you that, how many dollars per acre for carbon sequestration, and where you're storing your data is you in the middle with a paper form or a CSV and a lot of copying and pasting. So that's the state of play in most cases today. So having said that, I would say that, so we, as in our side of the company I co-founded, we're part of a larger community that is really seeking to build an open source ecosystem for collection and sharing of farmer controlled data. And so, I threw a bunch of, logos of different people on here. There's Open Team, which is the open technology environmental ecosystem for agricultural management. Sorry, I see that Vic's on the call. She'll get me if I don't get that right. And then we work with the USDA and a group out of Purdue that's building open source technology systems. And so there's a lot of different users of agricultural data, soil health data, and then a lot of other people who want to support them. And what we have is this really rich ecosystem of people who spend a lot of time thinking about how can we make managing agricultural data more fair, easier to use, and reduce those transaction costs so that farmers can participate in all of these different programs and they can benefit from them. And then we can increase their incentive to start that soil health journey, right? That step 1 is deciding to care. And every time you can lower a transaction cost, you make it easy for people to take that first step. And so real quickly, why is everything in this ecosystem that we're working with open source? It's because that, we believe that trust is transparency. So if we're selling a carbon, if an organization, not we, but if an organization is selling a carbon credit, if an organization is putting a stamp or a certificate on a product that you're going to pick up in the grocery store, that you have to have trust that that means something. And so by building open source tool chain, we know that the data standards and formats and the software that are interacting with that data are all open and transparent. And so, again, having mentioned that there's this big community of people who are thinking about this, this is what they've kind of come up with as the requirements of of an interoperable and open data ecosystem. And this would be the components of what I would say would be a proactive, data ecosystem. A reactive data system is just every time you want to join a new program, you grab the 20-page form and you just start writing and you fill it out, right? But if you want to be proactive and if you want to start early and say, how can I, at that step one of the soil health journey, also think about how I can manage the data to ease things downstream, what is required? And so I'm going to walk through each of these items individually. So first is this thing called Ag Data Wallets, which is a term that was coined by Open Team, and it's kind of what it sounds like, right? It's like your agricultural data is in a wallet that you have in your back pocket. It's portable. You take it with you. You own it. You decide who can see it, who can contribute to it, and who can use it. And the goal here is to enter data once and use it many times. So when I mentioned earlier, you fill out application A and it doesn't help B, well, can we get it to where the data that we put into application A already pre-fills that section of application B, reducing those transaction costs? So another piece that's required is support with the collection and management of farm data, right? Farmers may really want to benefit from these soil health practices, from the soil health data, but it's a lot of work to enter it in. So any good open ecosystem needs to have a space for what we call farmer support staff, right? People who can help collect the data, they can help quality check it, organize it, manage historical data. You know, they're like your accountants, right? When your accountant tells you all the information that you need to provide to do the taxes, and then they help organize it and they fill in all the boxes on your tax form so that you don't have to. They don't own your information, they don't own your financial data. They're just helping you put it in the right place in the right format. And finally, these data collection tools need to follow what we call the FAIR data standards, which means it's findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So if we get to that stage where a farmer has his own database and the data has been entered, how then can this system support people to use that data? Right. And we've been doing a lot of work, and by we, I mean this larger ecosystem again, in building out standard conventions. And I don't want to bore people with talking about data formats, but if you can imagine, your farm management platform might call a tillage operation tillage. And then you go to a carbon program and they say, we want to record events around soil disturbance. Right now, you, as that person in the middle, you're like, oh, soil disturbance must mean tillage. Okay, let me write that in. But if we can have standard conventions where people can kind of come to this central point, use similar systems and conventions, then this system knows, hey, I'm looking for soil disturbance. And if they call it tillage over here, I can just find it. I know that. I don't need a person to explain to me how to translate between disturbance and tillage. So it's that automation of the data between these different systems. And so kind of a more specific example, again, to talk about carbon markets, just because they're kind of the market of the day. People talk about them a lot. The market defines what data you need to collect to participate in that market. So the farmer or their support staff, they go through and they enter it all in. And at that point, once it's entered into this farmer's ag data wallet, their own database, now the market can request it. And so they can effectively pull it out at a push of a button so that it's all there, right? And now all of that information, because you've already entered in your ag data wallet, now you go to that second, program, that program B you're interested in. Any data that you already entered for program A is already there. So your job then to join the next program is to only identify the gaps where, the market program really cares about, the carbon market really cares about tillage and soil disturbance, but this other like regenerative score might care about how you treat your employees, or, other questions about that are more about holistically about the farm and management. And so you haven't entered that yet. So now you just need to enter that data to participate in the next program down the line. So, just mentioning here that certifications and field to market programs operate the same way, right? You start with what people push to you, and then you go from there. So I think this is the last one I think I'm going to talk about, and then leave some space for questions. And the last one, again, this is an example of what we call a digital coffee shop, which is just a way for people to explore data and connect with others and filter by their context so they can learn from that soil health data. And so because you've gone through the work of making this data comparable and sharing it and putting it in a shareable form, now it's easier for groups that want to do, kind of group learning or peer-to-peer learning to access that same data and enable that tool chain. And so I think I'm going to skip one slide here and go right to open it up for questions. I don't know if anything is in the chat or if anybody wants to raise their hand. I know there was one question earlier about sharing slides, and I think the answer there is we shared the email addresses of each individual speaker, so probably just reach out to them individually and ask for their slides, and we will be we have been recording this, and so we will post this on YouTube, or different people may post it different places, but a link will be available to view it sometime in the future.
There's a question in the chat box from Johan. He said, which is 10 soil health indicator do you figure are the most important?
I think that it's that's a difficult question to answer because and one of the benefits of MAF was that you kind of get to this of different risks that an area or a crop system was up against. So if you have risks, say for instance pH, salinity, that those types of things need to be in there. Phosphorus, over accumulation of phosphorus from animal manure spreading, things like that. Those things need to be accounted for. And then you need to have the physical, the chemical, and the biological covered. I think in the biological area, if you have just a diversity measurement of diversity, that's probably about as good as you're going to get in terms of actionable information, and to see if you're going in the right direction. Possibly the the carbon one, POX-C, which a paper, there was one paper I know that suggested that it gave an indication of the directionality of organic matter accumulation. So that if you see an increasing POX-C measurement, then you can assume that organic matter is in the upward direction. And if you see a decreasing from one measurement to another, then and it's a faster way to get an indication of what organic matter is doing. I think that was the key point of POX-C, since it takes 5 years minimum to detect a difference in organic matter. So if there's some indication of how organic matter is moving, that was the idea with POX-C. For chemical or for physical indicators, something that's going to indicate resistance to erosivity, or an optimization of the void space. So, things that are going to increase bulk density are things that usually improve soil health. Lower bulk density usually indicates healthier soil, better root penetration, better access to water, etc.
There's another follow-up from Johan. He said, what do you think about the satellite remote sensing application in soil monitoring?
I think there's promise. I mean, anybody else want to chime in for sure? I think there's promise. I just think that it needs to be ground truth and vetted properly before we kind of settle for something that's inaccurate. Thank you.
Actually, I have a question. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
No, I wanted to add there, like, well, one, I wanted to second Ashley's comment about ground truthing, but then I also I just say it matters what you're trying to do, right? So there's a level of precision if you're like engaged in a carbon market versus if you want to generally see if your land is getting healthier or not. And I think that second application, remote sensing can often already be there. I think in that first application around like precise markets, I've seen examples where ground truthing was pretty minimal and it undercut the trust in the markets. So it's a very double-edged sword there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. The market, trust is a really important part of this whole thing.
Actually, there's a question specifically to you from Abdul Wakil. He said, I'm from Pakistan, where we have a calcareous soil with high pH, very low in organic matter. What would you recommend to improve soil health?
What's the pH? I mean, like, well, I would say, so, this kind of goes towards carrying capacity I mentioned. And just because there's a piece of ground doesn't mean that piece of ground needs to be farmed. I know we have a friend on here from Ward Labs, and I got to work with them for a time, and I really enjoyed it there. And Dr. Ward, Ray Ward, is a really wise soil chemist, and he said that sometimes the best thing you can do to a piece of ground is to sell it, and which means that you're not going to, there's nothing you can do to it that's going to give you an ROI from any type of crop that you might grow on it. So there is that point, that you reach with a piece of ground, that where, if the margins are so slim, it's not worth it. Now to lower, chemically to lower pH, elemental sulfur is one way to do it. Ammoniacal chemical fertilizers lower pH. Anhydrous ammonia being one of the strongest acidifying fertilizers. Ammonium sulfate, another one. So it's a slow process, and it's a costly process too. So that's the point, is that, sometimes it might not be, you can, and this is another point that Dr. Ward made, was that you can pay for a piece of a good producing farm. A good producing farm will pay for itself. You might think you're getting a good deal on a farm that's degraded, that's cheap, but if you can't produce a crop on it, then it's not a very good, efficient way to pay for that, good in terms of ROI business thinking. So I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. I had to field a lot of those calls when I was at Ward with pH and salinity, and so, but make sure that pH, pH is one of those things that you measure it tells you a lot in a hurry about like what type of fertility you have. So anyway, good luck with that piece of ground.